Right, thank you colleagues, thanks for joining us, and thanks to our panelists as well for presenting themselves and sharing some of their thoughts and learnings over the time as well. Maybe just to jump into the first question, and maybe Chris, starting with you, since you're right next to me. In terms of leadership in general, within your company and in the industry, who do you consider as leaders at which levels? Is it mainly at Exco level? Do you consider them up to D-band? What levels of the organization? And also, what method do you use to encourage leadership within your organization?
Right, let me start. I think leadership isn't just about the lead at the top. Leadership, by definition, in my definition, is about inspiring people versus managers that get work done through people. Leaders inspire people. It starts at the top. Those of you that have been exposed to DuPont will know that a top-down approach is very, very effective. And from a leadership point of view, it's not just the COO, not just the GM, it's not just the mine manager, it's not just the mine overseer, it is down to the frontline supervisor. It is that person right through the hierarchy that actually inspires people, gives direction, creates the vision, and holds people accountable.
Phillip, then maybe jump into you, building on to Chris's question. In organizations, do we currently have the right people to lead on the human factor and behavioral change in our organizations and in terms of employee engagement? And if we don't have the right people, who do we still need?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, firstly to say, when a leader comes in place, you have to craft that compelling vision or come up with a strategy. And for the strategy to be realized, you have to bring an appropriate structure that will support your strategy. And following that is a staffing aspect, the right people for the right jobs. And I also want to take all of us back, that remember this journey started in 2003. And in 2003, the industry was killing or losing over 200 lives. So the same industry has really made a lot of strides and progress. We mentioned the figure of 77 last year. That shows that with the very same workforce, leaders and people, collectively, with some plan, we have been able to make vast inroads. Have we arrived? No. There's still a lot of room for improvement. Are our behaviors adequate and appropriate? You do get the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the challenge for us is to make sure where there's gaps, that we close those gaps, and we need to be intentional and deliberate. We cannot wish things away. We have to put certain measures in place to make sure that we close the gaps.
Johan, one of our legs in the Mosh system is behavioral communication. And obviously different companies utilize different organizational tools in order to communicate correct behaviors. What do you understand under that element of behavioral communication, and what have you successfully used within Anglo to communicate that?
Thanks, Leigh. I think maybe just to start off with, just apologies from Tema Makwenazi. I'm standing in for him. He's our CEO. I'm head of safety, so I'm standing in for him today. I think, Leigh, what we've done, certainly, we realize there's life-saving behaviors that's out there. We've also, as mentioned earlier, we've learned a lot from the pond. We've certainly picked up on cardinal rules and golden rules and those type of things, which is basic, life-saving type of behaviors that we would like people to do. But, we've taken a page out of what the doctor was saying earlier, and that is that if you use that word don't, it's got the wrong connotation to it. And the mistake that we had made, at a point in time was to have all our life-saving rules having that don't connotation in it. So we've just, about a year ago embarked upon a process where we started changing our so-called golden rules to Ahetu rules, which means, the rules come from myself, and it's got a bit of a positive type of spin on it. over and above that type of stuff, we do have these things are widely published. It's on notice boards. People are, trained on it. If you go and ask people about those rules, they certainly understand it. I think it's also about empowering people, to understand that they do have the right, to exercise those type of behaviors and talk for themselves when they feel things, are not as it should be.
Thanks, Jan.
Can I just add?
Please add. Yeah.
I happened to visit one of the Anglo-American platinum mines last week, Wednesday, with the Anglogold safety team. And just to add on what you said, just to affirm what you have said, one of the things that I brought along, can you just hold it? One of the things that was a takeaway from that mine was these cards. These cards defines the critical task behaviors per every occupation. Just to read for you, for a local driver, I will wear my PPE before going underground. I will always complete the pre-use checklist before operating a local, hoppers, or material car. I will never use a defective local equipment. So I'm just saying, this is a testament to basically what you are doing. You must be feeling very good that I brought this with me.
I'm excited about it.
And Chris, maybe moving to you. So Phillip touched on the interface between employees, management, and these various levels communicating with one another. And it was mentioned today as well that our other tripartite partners, being Labour and government, also have specific roles to play. What is your expectation as a COO of a company in the specific roles in terms of leadership behavior and having that capacity in place that also needs to be in place with the other stakeholders? What do you think we should do in also taking everyone along on this journey of zero harm?
I think the first thing that I'd say is that I'm reminded of having been a contractor for a while back in my past. And that is that all role players must be aligned on a common journey, a common vision, and a common approach, which is prioritized to actually seeking the common good. I think too often we've all got a passion for safety, but we may have different approaches. And where the bang for the buck comes from is when we are all aligned on that. That's the one point I'd make. I think the other point I'd make goes around expectations of other stakeholders. Let me tell you, I spoke a little bit about leadership, but leadership is about getting stakeholders on board. And I think that is absolutely critical, important for us.
Then, James, moving to the real adoption and adoption rates of leading practices in industry, and Phillip, maybe I can give it over to you, but we've seen on all our adoption monitors, especially if you look at an agency like Fall of Ground, we've seen high levels of adoption of nets and bolts, TARP. We're seeing improved adoption, and obviously in terms of entry examination and making safe, we have had high adoption. Why are we seeing this in year to date, this current state where we are actually regressing in terms of our success that we've seen in the recent years?
Yes, obviously, I think Caesar mentioned it earlier on, that if you look at the performance year to date, we somehow on the back foot, we're regressing compared to what we have shown last year. What is very important and key for this adoption, I believe, number one, is the ownership. We have to make sure that we take all our employees with us. There is a saying that if you want to walk very fast, walk alone. If you want to go very far, take people along with you. Just a recent example, I was underground yesterday. And I was commenting this team leader that at least I'm seeing an effective winch dust cover. And I asked him, why do we have these winch dust covers installed on these winches? He said, number one is to make sure that the ropes doesn't hit the winch driver. I said, okay. Number 2, he said, that's all. So for me, really, I was sort of challenged to realize that this is a team leader who's our first line of defense from the team point of view, and he doesn't have the full picture. And obviously, the managers were there and quick to say, we did tell them why they should use the winch dust covers. But what I want to communicate is safety is like sweeping water uphill. We can't rest. We have to talk about it, make sure that we institutionalize whatever initiatives, and above all else, make sure there's full ownership so that even when we are not there, people can do the right things by themselves.
I think it also touches on the sustainability of our various leading practices, and maybe on that point. Do you think various role players and stakeholders around the table have mentioned previously that maybe you should look around issues like independent verification of leading practice adoption or assurance functions. Would you support something like that, or you think that's something that the industry could look at to get that level, or should we stick to a methodology of self-assessment and verification?
Leigh, my point on that would be probably that we stick with self-assessment. And the reason I say that is, and I remarked earlier to one of my friends over here that used to be with the DMR, I think the DMR has done an amazing job if we look at our incident rates in terms of assisting, the operations throughout their rigorous inspections, and really I think they've upped the bar. Now certainly these guys are fully aware, in terms of what all the best practices out there are. So they really serve as a very good benchmark. And, during their inspections, they start insisting that those sort of standards are being met. So I think that's one important tool that we've got already in that space. I think the other one is, like was alluded earlier, best practices like at Sasol and some of the other mines, as where people can actually go out there and become converted by the people that's adopted these things. I think that will just spread the word as well. And I think once that starts taking place, something like self-assessment, self-pride, I think that's what will really drive, the adoption, as far as I'm concerned. Otherwise, we're going back in the journey model where we have to force something down. People need to do it because they believe in it.
I'd love to add on to that.
Yes, please.
I don't think we want more audits. I think we want more self-assessment. And back to the point about sustainability and making things stick and making a positive difference, I have a very passionate view that we implement stuff and we're not absolutely clear from people like ourselves sitting here through to the lowest supervisor doesn't actually know exactly step for step how to actually do that job properly. We assume that people know how to do the job, and they don't actually know. They know they've got to put a net in, but tell me, how do you go step for step at the start of the shift, doing your early examination, putting in a camlock prop for camlock prop and net for net? How do you get it done exactly safely? They know what the end product looks like, how to make it happen. Issue.
Is that something that we could do collectively as stakeholders from an industry point of view? Can we deal with that from that angle? Or is it something that rests more on organizations individually?
It's about you must know that I know that you know how to do that job. And that's where supervisors that don't know exactly how to do the job can't coach, can't correct, and don't supervise effectively. Sorry, it's my 5 cents worth.
And let me just add, we are on this journey. We are aware that we're not where we should be safety-wise as a group. And as a result, we basically are on the continuous learning posture. We basically picking up from the best in the industry. About a month or 6 weeks ago, we visited Sasol. So basically what has been shared here in terms of the ownership of the strategy, of the vision by the operators on the ground, we've witnessed that. So we can attest to that. And as I say as well, we've just visited Anglo American Platinum on their successful journey that they've had over 300 days fatal-free for the first in the history of Anglo American Platinum. We thought it would be a noble thing to do that. I think these exposure visits, for me, has really sort of affirmed the message of hope to say it is indeed doable. And when you visit these people and these minds, you see that it's not by chance that these people are basically achieving what they achieve. This safe, profitable production is basically institutionalized. You can see there's an effort in terms of the conditions, in terms of the behavior and the mindset that is collectively taking place. So what I'm saying is we need to also be learning from each other, be studious enough. Accommodate when you know that you are doing well. Be open to accommodate people to come and see. The come and see approach for me, the exposure, buys a lot of mileage. What I would have really spent 12 months to establish or develop, when I go to my next neighbor, performing on high levels and with those conditions, I come back tomorrow saying, you know what, I'm going to do it. So I think the exposure, let's visit each other, let's learn from one another, and throw away this resistance to change culture and attitude.
Johan, just touching on what Phillip said and some of the learnings that they've also had. We've touched a little bit on behavioral communication, for instance, and leadership behavior, obviously, throughout the sessions today. All of the companies here, I think, or most, probably 80% of the companies here have got visible and felt leadership, VFL, as a tool within their organizations in order to communicate and show the visibility from leadership. Do you think that we currently use VFL correctly in terms of the quality that we try to generate from VFL, or is it simply just chasing the numbers and KPIs?
Well, I park quite far from here, so nobody's going to scratch my car for what I'm about to say. I don't believe we're getting the value out of VFL that we can. And the reason I'm saying that is in the last couple of months, I've really spent a lot of time with frontline supervisors, middle management level guys, and understanding how they're doing VFL. And if I look at the information that we get back from the VFLs, it becomes very clear that people have defaulted, in my view, and certainly in our organization, to do inspections. They look at physical conditions because that's the most easiest thing there is to do, is to pick up something that you see is not right. People forget fundamentally what a VFL is all about. It's a conversation between two people about safety. It's about preparing yourself before you go and do the VFL to understand exactly what you're about to expect, exactly what type of procedures you need to be observing. Normally, 95% of those interactions should be positive. And, encouraging the individual that you've had the conversation with to carry on working safely, and then, very importantly, to get ideas from them about how they can carry on doing the work even more safely. And then lastly, to make a commitment about something that you as a leader is going to do and to take and to bring back and provide feedback to the individual. And I don't think everybody's consistently doing that. I think if everybody's honest with themselves, I think they'll realize that, I think there's huge opportunities, for us to leverage on, I think, the most powerful tool that we've got in our toolbox, this VFL approach that we've got.
And also, Johan, whilst you got the mic, how does that link back to your leading indicators, especially within the Mosh context, and looking after your leading practices that you've actually adopted?
Yeah, I think, there's something that people talk about: work as imagined versus work as done. Work as imagined is those, as people sitting in a boardroom thinking of a procedure, writing the thing out. But work as done is 1 o'clock in the morning. How's the artisan or how's the miner doing that work? And if you do a proper VFL and you really stand back and you observe about what's going on and you listen to the individual and listen to their feedback in a constructive way, you'll start realizing that a lot of our procedures are simply not dynamic enough, or haven't got enough of a top inside it for people to be able to adopt to the ever-changing dynamic mining environment that we're operating in. So I certainly think, if VFLs are done correctly, the feedback mechanism back to our work practices, should be very strong, and we should be all continuously improving on those.
And just a comment on the VFL, as you said, the whole issue of defining a consistent standard, so that when a manager A goes underground and a manager B goes underground, they basically going to achieve the same desired outcome. And I think in that we also need to be honest with ourselves. I mean, if I have 80 stoping crews of 22 people each, the question is, will we ever, if we have to go through an individual interface and interaction, will we ever be able to cover everyone? So we need to address those things. Otherwise, these interventions become futile. But it's very important that even as you go underground, you know, those steps that you need to follow, greet people. Because as managers, many a times when you go underground, you get at the waiting place, it's not to standard, the traveling way is not to standard, the support is not to standard. You even forget about greeting the crew. You already start lashing them. By the time you leave there, they don't want to see you back there. So, but with the interaction, if we really deliberate, intentional, these are the steps that I need to follow, they will look forward to seeing you. Yesterday, unfortunately, it was a team of 12. I could not have a one-on-one interface. I had a session with a team of 12. That's why I'm saying, practically, we also need to look at, say, if there's 12 individuals there, who do I, on my one visit a week or one visit a month, do I have an interface with? So maybe those are some of the things that we need to check and see where the gaps and close those gaps.
I'd just like to echo what Johan said with VFL. Too many times I've seen as well that deteriorate, not deteriorates, it morphs into a pure supervision visit. And the focus on changing behavior and modifying the culture, how we do things around here, is not uppermost in the agenda of the day. I just want to also remind us all there's a case study around Blue Water Horizon, the BP oil platform disaster. Guess what happened on a chopper 6 hours before that event? There was a head office VFL visit to that very platform. And some people were fixated on looking at harness expiry dates. Some people were looking at the hazard tape on the stairways to check on slipping and falling. And no one actually asked some penetrating questions, not in a supervisory manner, but in a complementary, constructive conversation or a corrective conversation from a VFL point of view that would have actually uncovered some of the things that were actually happening there. And all too often as leaders, as managers, we'll do a VFL and we are not prepared quickly enough to actually say, stop, think about what's actually happening over here. What happened in that case? People were too worried about interfering with production. I think that's something for us to take home on.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Colleagues, we've had a wealth of knowledge from our panelists here, but we still have 15 minutes left in the session. But I think it will be pertinent to give some of our members in the audience also the opportunity to ask questions to our panelists. We still have a number of questions here. What should we do to improve the adoption of Mosh, etc.? So I would like to open it up to the floor to ask questions, to share some thoughts that you might have in terms of what we discussed during the day, what some of the panelists have said in terms of the areas of leadership, behavioral communication, and the other areas that we've covered. So there will be rowing mics going around. So please, if I can have 10 hands, let's be positive.
Morning, thank you very much. I just want to comment in terms of the Mosh adoption. I don't know how from the CEOs and the Chamber of Mines, if we can encourage more union involvement in this forum, not at the adoption phase, at the design phase, so that we won't get resistance from the employees, so that they can go and assist in communicating the changes, whatever is coming up from this discussion. The other thing is, as I hear the issue of VFL, how do we engage with people? It's a challenge I want to put to the leadership in terms of, I feel there's a lack of, if we look at our line supervisors, they are leading people that are different from the time we were leading miners. Because I was staying in a certain complex or a mine official accommodation. Now the current miner is a neighbor to that RDO, and he must go and manage him. And if you look at that social effect, that's what I'm saying, we need to look at something Afrocentric leadership. How do I manage my neighbor? Because if you are going to take action at work, that thing can come, my house can be burned at home. So those are some of the dynamics I think we need to consider, so that when you do VFL, do we know how to engage these people, our employees, to have so that we can get their input in a free environment. So to me, it's more how do we our line supervisor to give them the leadership skill to manage the current labor force and the current social environment in which they sit with. And then the last point is on, I still have a challenge on it, the key to a safe workplace, whether you're going to put a net or not, is the end examination. And I feel, my feeling that we have got a gap in terms of, do we have the right product in terms of end examination? Do the people really understand it? Because I can say 96% of the finding on DMRs is poor end examination, and accident happens. So have we got a product which is helping the industry? Thank you.
Well, certainly some pertinent points there. I think it's about the employee, not only at the workplace, but outside the workplace as well, and how you engage him. And certainly also in terms of entry examination, which is much more direct. Chris, maybe?
Always have an opinion about that. I think to answer your question would be with a rhetoric question, is would a pastor be as unsafe in that neighborhood as the miner that you referred to? I would submit to you that he would be very safe. The issue goes around legitimate leadership. A long time ago, we had a situation where people were put in leadership positions and respect and trust was demanded or expected. Today's environment, where we are, it needs to be earned. You need to have legitimate leadership, and by your actions, you need to be seen as consistent and persistent. There's got to be a clear set of expectations that is clearly understood by everyone, and then building a level of trust in people by being predictable and consistent and persistent actually leads to a level of trust which would end up in solving the symptom that you've quite correctly raised, where people have difficulty in exercising authority on a top-down approach in a society where they are seen as equals.
Thanks. Phillip.
Just a comment on the early entry examination question. We lost a life in one of the mines on the 11th of April, and it was a fall of ground related fatality. And last month, on the 14th of May, it was on a Saturday, an off Saturday, we also had a very serious fall of ground accident which resulted in a paraplegic case. I mean, those are two very, very serious injuries. And in those injuries, there's common trends. Number one, the other one was Monday morning, just over the weekend. The second one was Saturday on an overtime shift. The one on the Monday morning, the hazard was identified on Thursday through a TAP system. The person, the supervisor who gave instruction to the morning shift and the night shift, but on Saturday he was hospitalized. He could not follow through the instruction that he gave. And Sunday night into Monday, we had that fall of ground. On the Saturday, the other one, the miner did not arrive, and the team leader took the team into the area. One of the things that they didn't do is the early entry examination. And when you sit down with these crews and say, you know that you have to do it, why didn't you do it? Number one, they will tell you it takes long to travel to the working places. By the time we get there, we left with almost 4 hours or 5 hours. What is the best thing to do is to do this. So what I'm trying to say is not the early entry examination process that is a problem. There are some underlying things that we need as leaders. When we sit down with the employees, openly, genuinely get to the root cause so that we can start, because that's where we need to come in as the leaders. We need to identify these things, engineer them out, and make sure that we create that enabling environment for our crews to comply with that. Because in normal circumstances where people have the full ownership, that is an excellent process to follow. And we have seen the results over the years with that implementation thereof. So let's not change things for the sake of changing. Let's address the real problem.
Thanks, Phillip. Colleagues, I'm going to take 3 or 4 other comments or questions from the audience, and I'll let the panelists respond. We've got about 8 minutes left, so I don't know if there's any other. Looking for hands. There's Jairus is there.
Hey, colleagues, what tactics do you use as a very senior leader in your organization to influence and support senior and middle management at your operations to drive the Mosh process?
Okay, very direct question. Any other questions? Comments? We've got one here, Vanessa.
Thank you. I just want to congratulate the panelists on your excellent leadership, and particularly Phillip. I think there was Mosh in action when you brought back that best practice from, was it Anglo Platinum Mine? Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. My question is really around health and wellness being core enablers for safety performance in the mining industry. And how can we take all these fantastic learnings from the Mosh adoption leading practice system over the last 7-8 years now to actually embed, you know, a culture of health and a culture of wellness that can actually, I mean, and if you think back to the case of Mr. Fusi, you know, how many other cases were there where those systems did not work? And in the case of Mr. Fusi, did we look at the root causes? One of the panelists mentioned, you know, looking at the root causes of these incidents. And how can we use the practices of Mosh to really prevent those root causes? And I can't help but think that, you know, there might have been some ailment, some health condition that really ended up with Mr. Fusi lying on that track. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Maybe last question before we get to respond.
Thanks, Chair. I think it ties in with what was mentioned there. I represent the aggregate and sand industry in South Africa, the most mined mineral in the world. I get all my best practice stuff from Australia and New Zealand. I don't get any of this Mosh stuff. I don't have falls of ground because we've got quarries. But how can we, as an industry, start doing little guideline documents? You guys have got excellent stuff. I've seen some of the best stuff today that I didn't even know existed. I don't have time, or our industry doesn't have time, to go and visit all the other mines to see what they're doing. Is there a system how we can take this stuff, put it in a pot, develop guidelines, call them best practice, coming out of Mosh, and share that with the industry? I'm missing that. As I always moan at the Mine Health and Safety Council, we do all this research. I don't see it being able to be used. I want a little document. We want to go and share it with the industry out there. So I'm asking for that question. I don't know who's going to answer it.
Just answering the aspect of adoption, I think we have heard from the Pakisa story and also from the Bambanani that one of the critical success factors is the leadership ownership. If the leader of that mine, the general manager, wholeheartedly buys into that thing, is going to happen. Especially ensuring that it's not only him who owns it fully, but there's an absolute buy-in from the key employees. That thing is going to happen. It all rises and falls upon the leader. Regardless of what we want to say, we are the taste makers. If we want a bitter taste, we will get it. If you want a sweeter, we will get it. But also a caution is, at times we bring too many interventions at once. We need to be focused. Let's make sure that we focus one at a time, embed it, institutionalize it, and go to the next one. I believe then there will be at least some level of sustainability to that intervention.
If I can just add on to the issue of, so how do we make Mosh adoption sustainable going forward? It reminds me about safety is actually the outcome of a business culture, and a business culture is in actual fact one in which you have got the right systems and means, or the workplace in place. You've got the right knowledge and competence in place on the other corner. And the third leg of the tripod goes around the behavior of the individual. That is the job of business culture development, is the job of the GM that Phillip referred to. And if you think about the Mosh adoption process, it is nothing other than a change management process which develops the safety culture or business culture of an organization. And by doing the adoption process, going through all 16 steps religiously, rigorously, and continuously and persistently, that is, in my opinion, what will in actual fact drive sustainable bedding down of the initiatives.
Yeah, great. Johan, maybe you want to also just respond to Vanessa's question on health and wellness issues, maybe as a root cause for some of these ills that we see.
I'll try and do that. I think when these incidents are investigated, and most companies these days have got very rigorous investigation methodologies, certainly if there was a health issue, that would have been unpacked through the medical fraternities, and, the lessons learned in there, would be adopted and thought about, when we put these practices together. I know of a couple of incidents that we've had as well, where medical was definitely an issue, and, although those things are normally very confidential, by nature, we involved our necessary medical practitioners on site to investigate those and start looking at it. I think from a fatigue point of view as well, there's a lot of work being done in that space to be able to identify leading indicators and come up with, proactive solutions. So before we put people in harm's way, that we understand what's going on as far as that's concerned. In the coal business in Anglo, where I am, we've got a system of check-in every shift. So that means when you get to your toolbox, talk in the morning, or if it's in the office or in the boardroom, doesn't matter. Every person gets to say how they feel, and it's up to the leader to try and gauge if anybody is disconnected, or if there's any emotional problems that there could be, or any other health problem, so that we can make sure we look after our brother or our sister. I think those are infancy type of steps, but at least it's starting to look at in that space. And maybe just a bit of perhaps a proposal. Every one of the provinces have got a tripartite structure, which everybody participates in, very actively. So, I would think in those structures there would be opportunity to identify, where certainly, you guys in the aggregate business might have a need, or you're looking for solutions, is perhaps in that networking forum over there, to maybe seek for solutions there. And I'm sure Zitza, you guys are also, very approachable when it comes to, other industries in mining, looking for solutions as well.
Niku, maybe on your point, I think the Mosh Learning Hub can certainly engage with you further on that suggestion. I just really want to thank our esteemed panelists. You all have specific leadership positions within your various organizations. I think you've really shared a lot with us today in this panel, and some of your knowledge over the years of experience that you have. And also thank you for participation from the audience. And I think, we certainly, I think we could have probably spent another 2 hours debating some of these issues and really to come up with some solutions, but I think we've gone a long way. So thank you very much for everyone.